the Course is like, hey, you really want to ascend the fastest way possible? You're like, yeah, tell me, what do I got to do? What do I got to do? And it's like, forgive your enemies. You're like, oh, I need to find a different guru. You know, like the ego immediately doesn't want to hear that.
Sure.
No one's words have ever touched you. No one's abuse of your body has ever abused you. No one's ever stolen anything from you and can't because you're eternal.
Yeah.
And then from that position, we say, all right, now be who you are.
Yeah.
And that's forgiveness, right? Is I refuse to demote myself to the egoic self any longer. I refuse to identify with a fragile, delicate self-image that can be abandoned, attacked, abused. That's not who I am. And so because I will to know myself, I want to know myself as the Christ, I forgive you. You did whatever you did to my body, you didn't do it to the real me.
And then the Course says, I am not a body, I am free, I remain still as God created me, right? It's always been one of my favorite lines.
Yeah.
Yes, they did something to the body, but the body's not me.
Yeah.
So if I'm angry with you, it's because I'm identifying with something that I'm not.
You got it.
Ever since I wrote my goals down with the pen, my dreams and reality have both been blending in. I just hope that in the end, my dad.
Hey, Aaron.
Hey, brother.
So, I was telling you off camera as we were starting how like I had this whole experience with Shaka Khan, like my last episode that came out, which was an incredible interview. And then I look at the footage and like everything that could go wrong went wrong. And I'm on the plane flying back to LA and I'm like fuming. And I'm like, Frank, you got to control this like anger because you can't, like, what are you going to do? It happened, right?
It happened, yeah.
There's going to be a way to salvage it. You know that. Just like relax. And the big thing around that was forgiveness. And I literally spent like the first hour and a half of the flight meditating on just forgiving this camera guy.
Good for you, man.
Thanksgiving is when we're releasing this episode. So what better way than to talk about forgiveness? But I guess like my first question is, what's the difference between grace and forgiveness? Because what I caught myself doing, okay, I'm gonna look past what he did to me. I'm gonna look past it. That's grace, right? Like I'm gonna be graceful, give grace. And then I realized, no, forgiveness is realizing he never did anything in the first place. You can't be harmed.
Somebody's been reading the Course.
Yeah, 10 years now.
Can't miss that.
Can you explain to people what that is? Like the difference?
I feel like grace is the power that enables us to forgive. Grace is the power that inspires us to forgive. So in your situation, I would say grace is that divine energy that comes into us when we have that little willingness, as the Course would say. It says just have a little willingness to forgive, to surrender something. And from there, the Holy Spirit takes the wheel, as the Course would say. And I feel like that activity of the Holy Spirit through us that inspires us, like, I need to forgive. I need to work on this. To me, that's grace, right? It's like, of myself, I can do nothing. As Jesus said, the personality, the egoic self will never want to forgive on its own. It always wants to create more walls, more separation. So what is it that does want to forgive? And of course, it's the true self of us, the spirit emerging through us that's waking up to its divinity. But in a deeper sense, it's that encounter with grace that when it's our time to awaken, that awakening begins happening of its own accord, like a fruit ripening. The fruit doesn't really do anything to ripen itself. It just receives the ripening process from the tree. It's all happening by that divine grace.
Oh, wow.
And that's how I see forgiveness, right? Is like at a certain point of our soul's ripeness, we start wanting to surrender, to open up, to stop judging, to stop holding grievances. And we truly want to move from the third chakra to the fourth, the solar plexus to the heart. And I call that heart consciousness or fourth density consciousness. It's the consciousness of the heart, which cannot hold anything against anyone, which doesn't know the word should or shouldn't. He should or shouldn't have recorded that or lost the footage. The heart doesn't know that. It only knows what is right now, and it always accepts what is. And so that's where we want to be in forgiveness, right? Is get out of the should and shouldn't, get into the isness of what's happening. The photographer I paid did lose my footage. That's what happened. So I invite Holy Spirit to show me the lesson.
You just reminded me, as you said that, I invite the Holy Spirit to show me the lesson. A quote just popped into my head where I am willing to see this differently.
Yes,
I think it's willing to see this differently. It's one of the lessons, right?
Yeah.
So let's explain to people what we're talking about.
Yeah.
A Course in Miracles, right? So there's this book. It was probably the most profound teaching of my life, obviously for yours, because it's become your mission.
Yeah.
So I remember being in like Kundalini class like 10 years, 12 years ago, like a college student, and just taking the book with me everywhere. I couldn't put it down. I was actually on Hay House Radio they would invite me on, and I would be in college, and I'd go to my car and I'd get on my phone and be on like radio shows talking about A Course in Miracles and answering viewers' questions.
Amazing.
So I was so excited to have you on.
Amazing, man. The Course has been my handbook for healing my mind and finding the peace of God. Everybody wants the fun, sexy, easy stuff to get to enlightenment. The breath work, the meditations, the
Ice bath,
off breathing, all of which are good.
Yeah.
The Course is like, hey, you really want to ascend the fastest way possible? You're like, yeah, tell me, what do I got to do? What do I got to do? And it's like, forgive your enemies. You're like, oh, I need to find a different guru. You know, like the ego immediately doesn't want to hear that.
Sure.
But I think that's what makes the Course so unique in my perspective, is that I've read an enormous amount of channeled texts, spiritual texts, classic religious spiritual texts. And the Course is really the only text I've ever come across that really says the path to enlightenment is through forgiveness, right? Heaven is entered 2 by 2. The only way to get to heaven is through the person right in front of you. If you can see them as forgiven, if you can see them as the Christ, the divine self, you are free, you are in heaven. And all other texts seem to emphasize all the other important avenues as well, self-awareness and all of that, chakra activation. But the Course is so unique, isn't it? In that it really just says there's one way to heaven, and that's through forgiveness. And I just don't see that, at least taught with as much emphasis as the Course does.
So it's a Christic terminology, right? Like it uses words like Holy Spirit and Christ and the Father and heaven, but it's
not religious.
A few days ago, I recorded a podcast. We start talking about like Christ consciousness and the light of the world and all this really powerful stuff. And I start to overheat, even though I was totally fine. I can feel this Kundalini energy. Yeah, totally just moving. And all the cameras shut off and they were telling us overheated.
One of my students in 40 University, the third program in that curriculum is basically like Kundalini self-awakening, which is a lot of Kriya, all the stuff we talked about before the pod, the bandhas, the breath work, the asanas. And it's a sitting practice and a non-sitting practice. The non-sitting practice is opening the heart chakra, service to others, devotion to God. But then every morning and every evening, I give them a really detailed sitting practice that I teach them to awaken Kundalini energy in the nervous system. And we have people that have, I call the inner conjunction, when the lightning bolt shoots up the spine. And we have a lot of those that happen through the process of the curriculum. But this one woman in our course is a dental assistant. And she was using a flashlight to look into a patient's mouth, those little mouth flashlights.
Yeah.
And she was noticing for like 30 minutes this weird buildup of energy in her root, and at the base of her spine. And she was like, what's going on?
Whoa.
She kind of knew like it's Kundalini activity, but she didn't know what was coming. And as soon as she gets this patient in the chair, she said that her Kundalini started shooting up the spine. And she's like, I'm doing that, Whoa. And the client's like, well, are you all right? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. And she's like walking over to the counter. And the flashlight went on and off a bunch and flashed off. And she like put it down and like had to stay herself through the whole experience. The dentist comes in and she's like, you need to take over. And he takes over. She comes back when she's back to her normal frequency again. And the flashlight she was holding had been burnt out. Whoa. Because she was holding it when she had the inner conjunction and it didn't work. Changed the batteries, didn't work. It blew the fuse on the battery. So that's why I say, don't wake Kundalini up too early, because you're also a circuit board.
For sure.
Your nervous system, and some people wake it up too early, fries the circuit boards.
It's actually why I stopped doing Kundalini, and I love Kundalini. I stopped doing it like 5 or 6 years ago because I'd be in bed. I mean, this is gonna look crazy on camera, but I would literally, like what you just described, I'd be like just sitting there normal, and then and it would be like this like so pleasurable, orgasmic feeling, but also like, I remember thinking like there's only so much your spine can handle. Hey, did you know that you're walking around like a radio tower, just broadcasting out these messages and frequencies on a subconscious level? And some of those broadcasts are negative, and they could be affecting the way people see you, the way people treat you. Did you also know that you're never upset for the reason that you think you're upset? We're also walking around with these trapped emotions, trapped old traumas from things that have happened to us in our past. And that's what I clear for people when they come and work with me one-on-one. We look for the subconscious blocks that are affecting you, and I clear them. Most people report the next day, if not that same day, they feel lighter, they feel happier, they feel free. And a lot of times you can check out the testimonials on my website to see people resolve physical illnesses and physical traumas like restless leg syndrome, eye pressure problems, cold feet, cold hands, anxiety. All of these things are things that I've seen get cleared when people work with me. It's all done on an energetic level. And the best part is that it's done remotely from the comfort of your home. We just get on a Zoom call, and in 30 minutes, you can experience what feels like 10 years of therapy. So if you're curious, go to www.frankelaridi.com, and I cannot wait to work with you. Let's talk about your courses, because you were telling me off camera, which I think is incredible. And I wish I had known about something like this when I was first learning about the course, which is your 3-year program. Like, that's a lot. 3-year program to really understand the course.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
It's such a blast, man. It's I feel so honored to be teaching this text, because it's, one of the primary texts that really set me free and took me out of my mid-20s deep dark night of the soul, deep depression, and really allowed me to live now in this incredibly expanded state of consciousness all the time. So much peace, so much love. It's from that book. I have to give credit where credit's due. So to teach it to others is the greatest feeling and blessing. So what we do is we've broken down the course, A Course in Miracles, into its 3 main components. Year 1 is the daily lessons. So there's 365 daily lessons in the course. You do one every day, and it's just like a systematic daily mind training.
And that's year 1.
And that's year 1. So we went live every day, recorded all the videos.
Whoa.
Yeah, 7 a.m. every morning, and did the lesson for 20, 30 minutes. And then we did a masterclass every Thursday on one of the key terms, because as you said, it uses the very Christic or Christian language as its kind of teaching modality. And so all of the terms in the course are non-duality ideas that it's using Christian language to package. So you have to unpack that for people and say, hey, when it says the Christ, it doesn't mean Jesus of Nazareth from 2,000 years ago. It means the eternal spark within you that's one with God, the spirit of you, that's the Christ. And so we did like 30 master classes that year to explain the languaging, so that as people are reading, it's like learning a second language, right? That. And so you kind of have to learn the language. So the first year is like introduce people to the course, the basic teachings that come through those daily lessons. It's very much like the elementary version of what the course teaches. Year 2, we get into the actual text, which is like, 600 pages, super, super dense. But now they have a whole year of a foundation, understanding the basic teachings already and the language. So when we jump into the text year 2, everyone's like chewing all the meat off the bone right away.
Wow.
Whereas, as you probably know, when most people try to read the course, they're like, dude, I'm sorry. Like, I pick it up and I read it and I can feel the frequency of it, but I have no clue what it's talking about.
So true.
You gotta learn the language of the course. So that's year 2 is study the text. And then year 3 is the back part of the book called the Manual for Teachers, which really teaches the full embodiment of ACIM and how to actually begin extending those teachings to others, sharing, being the light in your world. They call it being the teacher of God. And it's not about verbal teaching, although that can be what it includes. The teacher of God is one who embodies the energy of the Christ or Christ consciousness, such that you're always naturally being of service, bringing love, bringing presence everywhere you go, and you become a silent teacher of what God is like, right? Because when people encounter you, they're encountering the love of God, they're encountering the presence of God through you. So you really are teaching without teaching necessarily. And that's a powerful level of embodiment. So that's our 3rd year. And we're just finishing our 3rd year now. And we have new students coming in every year, of course. But it's been incredible to watch the progression of students from year 1 to year 3. There's especially one student in particular named Doza, who joined us year 1, and this is his 3rd year. We just had our retreat in Kansas City, and this guy has just been all in on the course for the last 3 years. practicing, studying, devoting his heart to the teachings. And I'm telling you, man, he showed up as a different person than even who he was last year, especially year one. And like, I just watch him sitting on the couch with people, and there's just a certain energy you can pick up with in people when they're on that frequency. And I could just see as he's sitting there that he's free.
Wow.
You know, and when he comes up to me and we give our big first hug, and then I look him in the eyes, I'm like, Doza. And I saw freedom behind his eyes, man. And the whole weekend retreat, he demonstrated that freedom, and just the way he poured his heart out to others, so present, so incredibly naturally loving. And I'm like, that's the fruit of what this book can do for everybody. I mean, it really is the book that'll take people from that third density consciousness level, ego consciousness, to heart consciousness, which is the awareness of oneness and unity. That's what the heart allows us to see when we activate it. And I think ACIM is the way through the path of forgiveness to open and activate the heart.
There's another quote that was like, teach the world not by preaching to it, but by your own recognition that along with you, the world is also healed. Something like that.
Yes, very close. Very good. That's definitely the summary of that passage. I don't have it exactly memorized either, but it says, you don't teach by words. I think it says, but merely
in your quiet recognition. That's what it was.
Merely by your quiet recognition that in your presence are all things blessed along with you.
Yes. Yeah. Woo.
So good.
I mean, it's like, there's so many lines like that where you're like, if you got only this, it would be enough. And actually, I think the Course says that, where it's like, if you learned just this one lesson, you'd be done.
Yes.
And there's like 365 lessons, like you said. And they're like, if you just got this one lesson, that would be it.
Yeah.
And I love also the line, because you talk about forgiveness being the way to enlightenment, is like the biggest teaching of Christ. But what I really like is that it says also, forgiveness is also an illusion. And that God has never forgiven because he has never condemned you in the first place. And they're like, forgiveness itself is an illusion, but it's the illusion that leads to waking up.
Yes. Isn't that amazing?
So amazing.
One of my favorite passages says, so in the beginning of the Course, it says, salvation asks nothing of you that you cannot give right now.
Wow.
I love that line. And then later it says, salvation is a paradox indeed, for it asks that you forgive what no one ever did.
Jeez, so true. Like, what?
Says, and that you overlook illusions, and that you stop chasing things you don't want. And ACIM always shows the paradox of egoic thinking.
Yeah.
That you really are like that guy or girl who goes to the bar every weekend. It's like you're looking for something that you've already gotten a million times, and it never satisfied you. And in fact, if you're honest with yourself, it's created a lot of suffering in your life. This constant chasing for the next whatever it is. But yet, look at you, still chasing it. So salvation asks that you stop chasing things you don't really want.
Whoa.
It's like, ouch. It's like
such a good parent.
Yes.
Just being like,
I call the Course sometimes, like in a tongue-in-cheek way, the Course really teaches you and kind of reads as like a compassionate bitch slap that you didn't know you needed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
You're like, oh, that one hurts, but I need that.
You're right. You see me.
You got me.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
So what would you say to somebody, because you probably get this all the time, so you have so much practice answering questions that people are going to have, but like somebody goes, well, my friend betrayed me. They really hurt me. That was a real thing. I experienced it. What do you mean? Forgive something like they never did it. What do you mean forgive something that never even happened?
Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who says that?
Well, this question will show us why forgiveness is the path to enlightenment. Because first of all, as you know, everybody gets forgiveness wrong. When people hear like forgive, they think we're saying, just be okay with that abuse. Forgive him means just accept that he did abuse you and be okay with it. False.
Yeah.
Forgiveness cannot prop up a false identity. And so the ego wants to hold a grievance because it really thinks it was abandoned, abused, betrayed, etc. And so we're not saying forgive from the egoic position. We're saying forgive from your Christ position, the eternal self that never was harmed by anybody. Yeah, right? It's a different level of awareness, because when you know who you are, I am not just this body, this person who's easily harmed, damaged. I could be killed with a single shot of a gun. A mere word could trigger me. That's where most people are living. That's not who I am. That's an aspect of what I am. The person is an aspect. It's included in what I am. But what I really am is something eternal and infinite. It's one with pure consciousness. It's pure existence. I am. And so if I want to know myself on that level, I have to let go of all the grievances that the small self is holding on to that keep me anchored to the egoic identity. I'm the person who has all these memories of all these things that have happened, and we identify with it. We release those wrong identifications through forgiveness. And so forgiveness asks you to forgive what no one ever did to the Christ in you. Meaning there's a place in you that nobody can touch.
Right.
Nobody can take anything away from it. Nobody can alter it at all, because the spirit of all beings is not in physicality. It's not bound in physicality. It's not touched by physicality. So it's no different than a dream at night, right? If you want to have a lucid dream, which means to enter your waking state while in the dream, it's a difficult practice, right? You do that by calling upon your waking state in the dream. I am not really here right now. I am in bed. It's Tuesday night at 3 a.m. and I'm dreaming of being in, the Himalayas or something. And so when you call upon your waking state in the dream, you raise your awareness to that level. So now you can experience the dream happenings from a higher level of consciousness, a more transcendent level of consciousness, where you're just witnessing what's going on. And you're trying to learn lessons from what's going on. One of the ACIM lessons, of course, is all things are lessons that God would have me learn. So from that higher level of awareness, you're just seeing everything as a lesson, and you're not identified with the dream character anymore, or the video game character. Like, you're the real living being on the couch, not the character on the screen.
Right.
And that's the same way that forgiveness asks us to see our reality, is be the real living entity, the Christ, the eternal spirit, which no one's words have ever touched you. No one's abuse of your body has ever abused you. No one's ever stolen anything from you, and can't, because you're eternal.
Yeah.
And then from that position, we say, all right, now be who you are.
Yeah.
And that's forgiveness, right? Is I refuse to demote myself to the egoic self any longer. I refuse to identify with a fragile, delicate self-image that can be abandoned, attacked, abused. That's not who I am. And so because I will to know myself, I want to know myself as the Christ, I forgive you. You did whatever you did to my body, you didn't do it to the real me.
And then the Course says, I am not a body, I am free, I remain still as God created me, right? It's always been one of my favorite lines.
Yeah.
Yes, they did something to the body, but the body's not me.
Yeah.
So if I'm angry with you, it's because I'm identifying with something that I'm not.
You got it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting like a free course here. That's great.
It's so cool, isn't it?
And so is everybody else, but wow.
It never gets old. Like, it's always fresh to talk about it. When someone begins this path, what we're talking about right now feels really hard for them. You and I have been practicing forgiveness for 10 years, about 10 years for me as well. And so now, I'd love to actually hear your reflection on this. There's different stages on the spiritual path where you notice a different level of awareness in yourself. One of those, I think really the journey from the solar plexus to the heart, from third to fourth chakra, from ego to heart consciousness, it's 4 primary stages we go through. The first stage has to be this painful recognition that the ego is not going to fulfill you. That nothing you chase in the world can fulfill you. Happiness is not outside of you. You've sought it, you've chased it, you've acquired it, and it's always fleeting. It never lasts. It's always short-lived. And so the first stage of that transition to the heart has to be, I'm done with this. I want something more. And there's this longing in you for something more. I'm ready to do what it takes to heal. I'm ready to ascend. That's stage 1, that burning desire for freedom. And then that moves you to stage 2, which is, all right, time to do the work. And that's when we really start looking inside ourselves. We stop blaming everyone for triggering us, but we start to say, why does that bother me so much?
Right, yeah.
What fragile self-image am I holding that gets so easily attacked by others? And we start trying to bring love and forgiveness to those parts of us. And that's when the dark night of the soul usually emerges, because we're kind of unearthing all of that negatively charged energy in our lower chakras that we've been accumulating our whole life.
Yeah.
It has to come up at some point. And just like a symptom of your body, if you get a rash, vomiting, sweating, nausea, all symptoms of sickness, as you know, are really toxins coming out of the body. The body's trying to eliminate toxicity.
Yeah.
So that's why you shouldn't suppress your symptoms.
For
You should
sure.
allow them and work with them. It's no different on the energetic level. Our emotions, our negative emotions, are an energetic detox process where it's trying to release those old energies. And so on one hand, you know, like to anyone listening right now, if you're in a really deep, dark night of the soul, experiencing those painful emotions, depression, suicidal thoughts, rage, shame, whatever it is, if you're feeling something intense in your life, congratulations, 50% of the job is already done. You brought it up. That's half the job, is just bringing it up. Because as you know, ego hides those things from us really well.
Yeah.
And it doesn't let those cats out of the bag unless it really needs to, if it's defending itself or something. So getting triggered is very good, because that's half the healing battle, is getting it up to the conscious level where I can see it and begin to take ownership
Now
of it.
look at it. Don't go to the bar. Don't go get
Don't
drunk and
bypass, don't
sweep it under the
suppress.
rug. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is what everybody does, is numb out.
Yeah.
So you got to be willing to look at your darkness and bring the light of consciousness to it and love to it, forgive it. And that's, you know, probably the hardest phase of the 4 phases. But once we get through our darkness and begin transmuting it back into light, we move to the 3rd stage, which is where we start to emerge into the heart, where we start to feel the effects of our healing, in that we're starting to feel more peace in our life. Things still come up. We still maybe get triggered, but we notice the triggers are much less intense now and easier to deal with now. And from that point, we start to actually see the benefits of all these things we've been practicing. We actually start to see why love really is a more intelligent state of consciousness, and why it's a more powerful state of consciousness. And we start gaining some momentum as we start practicing living from the heart. And that's that kind of like entering the aura of the heart chakra and leaving the aura of the 3rd chakra in that sense. And once we have practiced service to others, devotion to God, forgiveness enough, we have some momentum built where we finally enter the 4th state, which is full heart consciousness, where now it's just our effortless, natural state to be in peace all the time, to be in joy all the time. Even if a really intense situation manifests, if something really tragic happens before our eyes, we don't even have the ability to waste time and energy grieving and, oh no, why is this happening? We don't even go there anymore. Our only response to everything is, how can I help? How can I be of service? How can I bring light? And so you're always living in that open-hearted space of love where there is no suffering. And so I guess the reflection I was going to ask you about is, I'm at the point now in my forgiveness journey where I'll still notice grievances arise every so often, but it's like there's so much awareness on my inner world, because I'm just always watching it, that the second I feel a contraction in my state of being and a grievance is there, I see it right away and I'm immediately doing forgiveness on it.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, stuff is still arising every so often, but I don't suffer. Like, it's not suffering because there's no resistance anymore.
Yeah, 100% the same. And you know, like things will come up and I'll feel it. And it's like you said, well, I'll think, okay, why am I feeling that? What do I need to shift within me or look at, or what's coming up for me to, you know what it is also for me? I think sometimes it's like giving me the opportunity to forgive.
Yeah.
Like giving me the opportunity to practice. Like, if you're here to do the curriculum, do the curriculum. You know what I mean? Like, life is the class.
Absolutely.
So do it, right? Like, oh, here's another lesson. Here's another lesson. You also talked a lot about emotions, which is so interesting because the work that I do is clearing for people trapped traumas, emotions, beliefs. And I'll literally pinpoint, so I'll tell them, you felt this or had this belief at this age. And if I keep going back to a certain age a lot, I'll say, hey, what happened at that age? And they'll be like, oh, that was when my parents got a divorce and I thought it was my fault or whatever. You can like really do the work and forgive and go back to every person you need to, even if it seems like the smallest thing. Go back and forgive if you just if it came to your mind.
Yeah.
Like what does the Course say? There is no order of big or small.
Yeah, no
like
order
a
of
miracle.
I love this conversation because so in the Law of One, which is a different channeled text, it talks about the lower 3 chakras and how they hold all our traumas and distortions, as they call it. And that's why the path to the heart is through balancing the lower 3 centers, because that's where all the blockages are. And this is like an aspect of metaphysics of the chakras that I think a lot of people don't know, is that it's common to hear like, oh, my heart chakra is blocked. My throat chakra is blocked. My third eye is blocked. And that's kind of true, but like if we want to get really specific, the upper three centers, heart, throat, third eye, don't have blockages. They have a lack of activation because the lower three are blocked in some way, because that's the foundation, right? The lower three centers are the building blocks of our energy centers. And so those energies are filtering up through every chakra. Every chakra is a filter for energy. So at the root chakra, it's just the filter of pure primal survival and sexuality. It's like those two things. What makes you a human being?
Right.
What makes you want to survive and not die? And what makes you a sexual being is root.
Yep.
Orange chakra, sacral chakra, orange ray, is like the energies of your personhood, of being a personal self, having personal awareness, knowing that I'm a separate from my environment and things like that, and my personal will, my personal desires, my personal desire to create certain things. That's second chakra. Third is my social self, how I engage with others, how I show up for others. And that really creates like my personal willpower, which is where the ego finally comes online in the third chakra. And so like animals, for example, are in the second density of consciousness, which means they only have the first two centers activated, or red and orange. They don't yet have a yellow ray activated because the yellow ray is self-awareness. And self-awareness can only happen through social hierarchies.
But I also want to say, because that's actually a good point, they can be teachers to us because of that.
They are.
Right? Because I notice sometimes, like I have two cats, and I'll notice sometimes how just like, they're not thinking, they're just like so present.
They're always being.
They're just here. Yeah. Yeah.
Because at their level, they don't have that reflexive mechanism yet that turns in on itself and becomes an object to itself.
Like even looking in the mirror, right? They're just like, oh,
yeah,
there's a reflect. But they're not like, that's me. I'm,
Who am I?
Yeah.
They don't think that stuff yet because they're not on that frequency level yet. And so human beings at some point in our past evolved or emerged into the third density of consciousness where the solar plexus became active. And I think honestly, it was because of the advent of language. So at some point, ancient hominids or whatever we evolved from would have started using noises to refer to objects, rock, banana, tree, water. And at some point, they started using noises to refer to each other in the group. So once you have a noise, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I call you Frank. Back then it would be like hoo hoo or something. But that you have a noise that when anyone makes that noise, everyone knows which hominid we're talking about. That's you. So you're like, I am the name, the sound, I am. And it gives that reflexive mechanism a switch to turn on. And now we're in the third density where the social hierarchy forms and we become conditioned beings through our social interactions. We're constantly reflecting ourselves against everybody else. That's third density. So it's the density of separation, comparison, competition. And humanity suffers greatly in that density level until it eventually learns the lessons on that level, which are the lessons of love and understanding, and begins to emerge into the fourth density, where now the green ray starts to activate. And that's when we start becoming heart-centered beings, where we literally see and experience everyone as our equal. We don't feel that we're better or worse than anyone. So tribes can't form anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everything becomes about love and unity at that level. So humanity right now is on the precipice of emerging into the fourth density. That's what the 2012 Mayan calendar thing was.
Yeah.
It was the planet being magnetized to that green ray frequency.
Again.
Yeah. It's a real thing. Like we've experienced it. And so right now in our world,
and 2020 was another big one.
Another huge
And then now we're on
forward.
like another leap.
Because what happens is it's just like the individual ascension. As soon as you have a conscious awareness of your spiritual journey, we call that a spiritual awakening. You're like, oh, I'm a spiritual being who needs to awaken. Okay, I guess I need to heal and stuff. And then boom, dark night of the soul, all your shadows come up. That's because you've raised your consciousness to a higher level, so it has to scrub out the lower level stuff now to be on that level. And that's what we call healing. The planet's doing that right now, in that all the karma humanity's accumulated, all the wars, the genocide, the abuses, the travesties that's gone on, we have to pay that karmic debt off. And we do that through healing it, forgiving it. And forgiveness is the hardest thing right now for humanity to learn. And we see that with like Israel-Palestine, for example. Everybody wants to be right. Everybody wants to justify what they feel, rather than say, if we're going to not continue to do what our forefathers did and kill each other and fight each other, if we're going to really create a world of peace for our children, It starts with me right now forgiving you. And again, forgiveness doesn't mean you're really a scumbag. You really did hurt me and killed my family and all these horrible things, but I'm just going to somehow be okay with that. I forgive you. That's not what it means. What it means is now I know who I am, which means I know who you are too. And I know that you must have forgotten who you were to do all those things.
Whoa.
And so on behalf of your divine nature that I see, like I know that deep down you're the Christ like I am. On behalf of your true nature, I forgive you. Because I know that if you were aware of who you are, if you were aware of love, you could have never done those things. So it's like a concession to their blindness to themselves, right? If they can't see who they are, I can see who they are. And if I can see it, I'm going to call it up out of them. And that's how we awaken others, right? The Course says, you become the savior of the world as you forgive the world, because by your quiet recognition, everyone else is blessed. If I know my Christ nature and I know your Christ nature, it's impossible that you and I can be in an interaction and you won't feel that from me. You know what I mean? That unconditional love, that holding space, being present, overlooking your trespasses against me, forgiving you for those. That is the most powerful thing a human being can do. And it sends so many energetic messages in the undertones of the conversation or the interaction that words can never convey. And you can't fake that. You know, you cannot fake authentic love. It's either embodied in it or it's not. People either feel it or they don't. And so again, forgiveness is how we get there. Forgiveness is how we move out of third density to fourth and activate the heart chakra such that we can actually live as heart-centered beings.
Man, I was getting like teary-eyed when you said that, because like, you say it with such authority. Like you said, someone cannot not feel it.
Yeah.
When you say it like that. And it reminds me of like Nelson Mandela when, you know, he was in prison, the same guy that would like, he asked for water and this guy peed on him. And that same person, when Nelson Mandela was being inaugurated as president, had that guy sitting right next to him as a sign of like, ooh, I'm gonna cry,
wow.
of like total forgiveness, like, you know?
Yeah. Let's look at a real world situation right now, Israel-Palestine. But let's imagine the Israeli government was benevolent and self-aware and all of that. And when they got attacked by Hamas on October 7th and all those innocent people were killed, if they released an official statement that said, a great travesty has happened today in our country. Our hearts are with those who've lost their loved ones today, but we want to make an official announcement that Israel will not retaliate against this attack because we refuse to harm another of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. We refuse to let another innocent life be lost because of the need for revenge. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine?
But can you imagine how big, like people hearing you say that right now, people are going to be like, in the world that we live in,
people don't even know that's an option, right?
No way.
Revenge is the only option.
Are you crazy? We need to arrest them. We need to kill them. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, you can't just let them do that. It's like, no. We're not saying you don't protect yourself. You don't take every measure to protect the innocent. Of course you do, right? That's never the question. Love always protects. We're saying we're not going to become like those who've attacked us by attacking back. We're not going to fight evil with evil, as Jesus said, but overcome evil with good.
If I think about it now with Gandhi or Nelson Mandela, all these people at the time, people were angry with Martin Luther King Jr.
Yep.
I mean, his followers would be like, what are you talking about? Silent protests and this and that.
Yep.
But now we look at them and we go, whoa.
Yep.
Wow, the power you had to do that.
We almost worship those beings now.
Wow. Because it's an impossible thing to do, we think, right?
Yeah.
We go, well, they did the impossible.
Yes. But if that happened, we would see a completely different landscape than we do now, which, what do we see now? Of course, Israel's committing genocide in Palestine, trying to get their revenge. And it's like, see how we just perpetuate the problem when we cannot forgive? Some people see forgiveness as victimization. Just like, yes, I'm your victim. Do whatever you want to me because I forgive you. And it is the exact opposite. Forgiveness is, I forgive you because I'm not your victim, because you didn't do anything to me, what I really am, because I'm empowered and I know who I am. From that position, I forgive you. I refuse to be somebody's victim. And isn't this what we all love in the movies, right? When the hero, like James Bond or something, when he's tied behind the chair and the villain has him in the dark room and he's torturing him and beating him to a pulp, and James Bond refuses to lower his confidence and say, I'm not telling you anything. and he keeps standing up to the villain or spits in his face, and we're like, oh yeah, go James Bond, because he's not cowering to that energy. And we love that because it's called empowerment. Forgiveness is kind of like that to the ego, which means the ego is trying to beat you up and say, can you believe what they did to you? You got to attack them back. You got to be twice as evil as they were now because they deserve it. And it's trying to talk you into becoming like them. And instead you're going, nope, refuse to do that. I will see them as the Christ. I will forgive them. I will not lower my frequency to their level. And that is the ultimate level of power that comes when we start practicing forgiveness. It's a refusal to deny yourself anymore. It's a refusal to devaluate yourself anymore. But I understand that that's not easy to see. When I tell someone, hey, forgive your abuser, it's like, never. Because you still see yourself as their victim. And that's why it's hard to forgive. I'm not saying forgive them as their victim. I'm saying forgive them as the eternal being that could never be their victim. Wow. That's empowerment.
Yeah. Whoa, there's so much there. So what happens when two people come together in agreement? Or as the Course says, two brothers come into agreement?
I think the Course would say that they really meet for the first time.
Whoa, yeah.
When there's not all the projections in the way, when two beings who are aware of their Christ nature and they see the Christ nature in one another, they're two angels in heaven in that moment.
So let's use a hypothetical. Somebody that you don't talk to anymore, you have forgiven them. It's taken a while, but like this person has forgiven them. Does that mean bring them back into your life? Or can it mean, I forgive you, but I still don't need, like, I'm done with that pattern. That's an old experience. That's an old loop. I'm going to now have new experiences and new loops and new lessons.
Yeah.
You know, like for me personally, honestly though, that is where I'm at with a lot of people in the past that I've forgiven, where I genuinely think of them and I smile, or I go, oh, I love that person. Oh, it's such good times, or whatever it is. But I'm also like, but I have no desire to ever talk to them again.
To me, it's a total sign of spiritual evolution.
Okay.
When you can have that reaction where it's like all about what you feel. Don't lie to yourself. Don't bypass what's really there. What do you actually feel when you think about that person? And if there's any remnant of a contraction, you have more forgiveness to do. But when you get to the place where you think about that person who may have abused you or hurt you or betrayed you, and you genuinely feel love for them and compassion for them, and there's no contraction in you when you think about them, you've completed your forgiveness work with them, and now you are the creator of your reality. You no longer have to invite them into your experience anymore, because we're all at different levels of consciousness in our growth, and you kind of have to be true to your own level to a certain extent, which means I'm friends with everybody. Nobody's not my friend. I'll greet everyone on the street, a stranger, like I've known them my whole life, and hug them and all that stuff. But am I going to invite them over for dinner and all this stuff? No, I'm not going to open my container to people who have energies that I no longer care to interact with, like jealousy, or they want to use you, because that's part of being the creator of your reality. Saying no to what you don't want is saying yes to what you do want. So you've got to create your life the way you want it to be, but never putting anybody out of your heart. It's like, look, we're all one. We're all at different levels of growth. We're all the same being at the end of the day, at different levels of awakening. So like, you're perfect where you are. You're perfect where you are. We don't need to be in each other's life anymore. You need to be true to where you are, just like I do.
Oh, I love that. Cool. Yeah, I love that. So the Law of One then, because I didn't know it was a book. Earlier when you were talking about it, you were like, the book, the channel text. I didn't know it was a channel text. Okay. I knew like the idea of the Law of One, which we've talked off camera about this, where I resonate so strongly with that. I mean, it keeps me up at night sometimes, where I'm just like, I cannot shake this feeling of like, it's everybody is me and I'm them. And yet none of us are actually even here. It's just like God experiencing itself in every way, right? So like I don't really sit with ayahuasca anymore, but in my last one, I've done probably like 24 sessions or something, or ceremonies. I remember one of my most powerful ones ever was with a Shipibo shaman from the Amazon. And it was like, I actually got up from the mat and ran outside, and I was like staring at the stars, And I remember just being like, oh my God. And one of the volunteers came behind me and I looked at him, I was like, why didn't you tell me? Like, why didn't you? I remember I kept saying, why didn't you tell me? Like that we are, I'm the only one here. And I remember looking up at the sky and I was in such disbelief of like, holy shit, this whole time. True. Yeah, and what the feeling that I got was like God, it was this one being and that's it. And this massive universe, whatever, but wanted to experience itself. And so just boom, bursts into so many different things, people, experiences, everything is God. It's just one thing here. And he was like, let's go back into the room or whatever, you know, when we walked back in and before we walked into the room where the shaman was still in there chanting, you know, doing her like ikaros. And we were in that room, he was standing in front of me and I'm asking him questions and he would disappear and I'd be in a room by myself. And then his name was Peter, and I'd go, Peter, and then he'd be in front of me again, and I would hear him finishing what he was saying.
Wow.
And then I would literally just be in the room by myself, and I remember I was like so in between those two worlds, and I'd have to yell, Peter, and then he'd be in front of me again, you know. And it was that feeling of like what you say is like the law of one. I didn't know that that's what it was called. I didn't know there was a book, but it is that feeling that I cannot shake, you know.
I love it, man. Yeah, it's so funny to reflect on, you know, oneness experiences like that, because I feel like especially plant medicines do a really great job of giving you a glimpse of the infinite and what's available. But do you know who, you know Ram Dass, obviously?
Yeah, I love Ram Dass.
You know Maharaji?
Okay, what the heck is happening? God, oh my God.
Were you just thinking about that?
Oh, what is happening? I swear to God, this is a joke. Like, I swear this podcast is not a podcast. It's meant for my and the world's together awakening, because he's my guru. And not only that, but ever since I realized he's my guru, I have a whole shrine of the Maharaji and Hanuman in my house.
Oh, wow.
And crazy things have been happening to the point where, and I want to get to Ram Dass, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good.
I remember one time when I first saw him, I was like, why does he sit like that? It's annoying. Like, you're this massive, incredible guru. Like, you know, like I was mean. Like, I remember just like, that was my first thought when I saw him, you know? I'm like, you could look like anything, you know?
A lot of people's thoughts about him.
For sure, I'm sure. And he like knows that, you know? And so I, one time was doing like, my hips were kind of tight, so I was doing frog pose. And as I was in it, my arms started to get like, kind of like my wrists were getting tight, so I started going like that. I found myself sitting exactly like him.
That's right, he would sit.
And then I look up and I see his photo looking at me and smirking in my shrine. And he's like, see, it's comfortable, isn't it?
He got you, bro.
Totally got me. I mean, he's hilarious.
Yeah.
And then I was, sorry to overtake your story, but I was in Spain 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago now, and I had one of the most mystical experiences of my life. I didn't want to go to Spain. My spirit kept telling me, go to Spain. I had no reason to go there. Like, no reason, no plans, nothing. I'm like, I really don't want to go to Spain. I'm finally home. I've been traveling, but I went to Spain. And I go to Mallorca. I stay with a friend who had actually been to one of my retreats in 2019. And it's this German guy. And then he introduces me to his friends. So many past life experiences. It was incredible. But one thing that happened is that I took mushrooms on the last day I was there, and I wasn't planning on ever doing, I'm like done with plant medicine is what I keep telling myself, and then I keep finding myself in these scenarios. And so I'm there, and this guy, he was like, look, I'm gonna do a ceremony on the last day by myself. Everyone's leaving the house. If you want, you can do it with me. I actually would like for you to join me. I said, okay. So we do it, and at one point, because we're in the living room, but we're having our own experiences. Like, he's over there and I'm over here all night. And at one point, we look at each other, we lock eyes, and we stared at each other for about 10 minutes. Like, unflinching, unmoving. The next day, as we're driving to the airport, because I'm going back to the US, he's going to Italy, we're talking, and he said, you know, when we were staring at each other, I saw you as Hanuman. And the crazy thing is, I've never ever mentioned Hanuman. Not only not on social media, it's a private thing. Like, that's something I do alone, you know? I didn't think this German guy in Spain would know who Hanuman is, like Lord Hanuman is. So I never even brought him up.
Amazing.
So yes, I know who Maharaji is.
You must you clearly embody the energy if he's picking that up. You know the quote then that Maharaji said when Ram Dass and his devotees from the West brought the LSD when they came to visit, and he took like 3 tabs of it, and then nothing happened. He says, you know, our people have known about these medicines for thousands of years. In the Kulu Valley, they have the magical mushrooms that they use as medicine and stuff. And he said, these medicines are very great. They bring you into the room with Christ. And he says, but you cannot stay. He said, so better to become Christ. That to me is what plant medicines do, and they give us those glimpses of oneness. It's like, how real is, you never told me, man, we all is one. Like, it's actually true. Yeah. And then you kind of fall back out of that awareness, back down to your default mode where everything feels separate again. And it's like that invitation from Mother Aya or whatever the plant medicine is to like, come up higher, come up here. This is what's available up here.
Yeah.
But you got to do the work to integrate it and embody it, to keep it all the time. Otherwise, you always have to take a plant medicine to feel it.
Right. And that's why people, I think, do return over and over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People get addicted to that, chasing the dragon, right?
You mentioned that quote, and I love it because Sri Sri Ravi Shankar from Art of Living said the same thing. And when he said it, I really heard it. He said, we were driving in the car together through the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I'm recording it. It was like a recorded video on the YouTube channel. It's so good. He's so great. And he had never done one. It's always been sit down like this. He had never done like an interactive thing. So I'm driving us through the Blue Ridge Mountains, and we have GoPros everywhere, and we're just chatting.
I think I saw this.
Nice, really?
I went to your channel.
Cool. I think it's like the trailer one right now. It's like the main video. Okay.
Yeah.
So at one point he says, I asked him about plant medicine, and he says, it's a beautiful thing. It gives you a glimpse. Now you know what you're seeking.
Yeah.
And I love that because when the other end, I love Sadhguru, I do his Kriya Yoga every day, but I had a private meeting with him in Nashville. It's not on camera. We're just chatting. And we got into like a little bit of an argument where he was like, you just like ayahuasca because you see kaleidoscopes. And I was like, I've never seen a kaleidoscope.
That's so Sadhguru.
Ever. Right? Yeah. He's like, oh, you just like the shapes and you're distracted. And I'm like, I started getting so defensive. I'm like, I've never seen like shapes and this and that or patterns. I get downloads. I'm getting information. I'm getting glimpses, but I realize now both of them were right. And you're right. Right. And Maharaja was right. It's like,
Yeah. Two things can be true.
Yeah.
I consider plant medicines to be a miracle, an absolute miracle. How else can you give somebody who may be totally asleep to who they are a potent experience of the divine like that?
Oh yeah.
But they're not the healers in and of themselves. They're healing facilitators, but nothing infringes on the soul's free will to heal. It's got to be you. It's got to be your own desire to look within and bring light to the dark places and be willing to face your past. And really it's like revisiting those memories of your abuse, your traumas, but seeing them from a higher level of consciousness now, seeing them from your present state awareness of love and unity. And to me, speaking of heart-based consciousness, when you really arrive at that fourth density level of consciousness, the hallmark is that you're able to perceive the fear behind other people's actions. And that's increasingly hard to do the more intense their actions are. So people that are killing other people, committing genocide, war, abuse, putting people in prison, like those are the people that are easiest to judge because it's the hardest to perceive the fear from which they're coming from. The need for power is really coming from a fear of not having power, being powerless. The abusing somebody physically is a fear of connection and intimacy and needing to keep a distance between yourself and others because letting people in is scary. And there's always a fear behind everything ego does. Ego is fear, right? Ego is the belief in separation, as the Course says. So when you're able to effortlessly and immediately pick up the fear frequencies coming from behind everyone's actions, that's when you're in the heart. Because when you can perceive the fear in others, it's an instant call to compassion. You can't feel anything but compassion any less than a little scared child. When a child's crying out, you don't say, shut up, Tommy, there's nothing bad happening. You're just whining. I don't want to hear it. When a child cries,
you go, oh, it's okay, don't worry.
Pick them up. Yeah, because you're like, at their level, they don't understand it's okay. And they're just crying about what's in their world. And isn't everyone just like that, dude?
Wow.
Everyone's a scared little kid who's deeply been traumatized. They've been hurt in their life. And so hurting people hurt people. Those who do the worst things to others are the most traumatized and in pain and they've forgotten the most who they are. So they're the ones who need the most forgiveness and compassion, but they're the ones who receive the most judgment and hatred, right? And if I put my fists up and you're like, yes, brother, and you put your fists down, it's like, I don't really want to fight you anymore.
Right.
I need you to be like, let's go.
Yeah,
right? And you're depolarizing others when you overcome evil with good, when you turn the other cheek, when they strike you and you say, I forgive you. it immediately throws this gigantic mirror up in their face where they go, oh my God, I just hit somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you go, how dare you hit me, and you try to hit them back,
then they're like, I'm defending myself.
Yeah, I'm right. I definitely was right to hit this person because look how mean they're behaving now. They deserved that punch, and the fight continues. So you're not giving them a reflection of who they really are in that moment if you're not in forgiveness. So again, forgiveness, although being gentle, is the most powerful thing, the most powerful energy that we can access, because it speaks to the energetic level of who somebody is, not the conceptual egoic level. It bypasses that level altogether, and without even saying anything, you can show someone a blinding reflection of who they are in that moment, such that they go home and they get introspective, man. They're like, oh, I gotta look at myself, man. I can't believe I said that, because you were so gracious towards their negativity. And it's just, I could talk about it all day. I
can hear you talk about it all day. Yeah, seriously.
It's like you need to experience it to really get it.
Wow, man, this is like one of my favorite episodes ever. This is so fun.
I love it, man.
I hope people are really resonating with it all, because this is a lot. Note that I wrote down is that the dilemma or the predicament that we find ourselves in is that, one, we see the world as guilty, and two, we see the world as separate.
The Course kind of meets you where you're at as an ego. It kind of like the book like speaks to you as an ego. Like, I know you believe you're this ego, so I'll talk to you on that level, but it talks you up out of that level. And so when it comes to the world, it'll say things like, the world that you see is not the world your father created. We think the world is objective. And so we're like, what do you mean? The trees is not what God made? The sky, the clouds is not what God made? And of course it's not talking about that. It's talking about the subjective world you see, which is all the perceptions and projections you've laid onto the world.
But even the tree, right? So like, let's use that as an example. So like, maybe you look at a tree and you go, wow, that is so beautiful. I've never seen leaves that color. And I might look at it and go, God, that's such a weak and wispy tree.
Yes.
The tree is neither of those things.
Right.
It's our projection onto it.
Yeah. I mean, I think everything has such an eternality to it that if we could really experience the present aliveness of even a tree, we could sit all day in front of that tree and just be blown away by this incredible thing the universe is doing called tree.
And an ecosystem.
It comes out of the dirt and twists and leaves and fruit grow and birds come. Like, whoa, this is incredible. You would never stop being in awe of it. But because I label it tree, my mind says, I already know what tree is. Tree, got it, moving on. And it's like, I'm only experiencing labels now, not the aliveness, the reality of something. But we do that much worse with other people, world events, etc. And so what it is the projection of everything I've denied in myself, the things I feel guilty about, the things that I've repressed or don't want to think about or acknowledge in myself, my own greed, my own pride, my own selfishness. I don't really want to acknowledge that I have a lot of selfishness in me. And so because I don't want to see it, I hate all the greedy billionaires so much. Look how greedy those people are in their stupid Fortune 500 companies that are corrupting everything, those greedy bastards. And it's really because I haven't owned my own greed. And you know this is true because the moment you start to own your greed, like literally anybody listening to this podcast could try this as an experiment. Everyone's angry at the rich people these days. So take a Bill Gates, take a Klaus Schwab, somebody that you project all of the evil onto, and say, every time I'm triggered by that person, when they show up on my newsfeed or I see an article and I feel, oh, Bill Gates, that son of a, right? Instead, let me turn right within and say, where am I greedy?
Wow.
And if you did that, you'd be like, yeah, I was pretty greedy last night when I did that thing. And
yeah.
You start seeing all the moments in your life. You're like, I was pretty selfish of me, if I'm being honest. And once you're like, I forgive my greed. I forgive it. It's okay. I'm just looking out for myself. I'm doing my best. I'm growing. Greed is a natural part of human evolution. I forgive myself for my greed. And eventually you start not being afraid to see your selfishness. But when it comes up, you're like, oh, there's some selfishness. I need to forgive that. You're like, hey, man, I'm sorry I said that. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. And you're like taking responsibility for your selfishness now. I promise you, once you've done some of that work over the next few weeks even, you see Bill Gates show up on your newsfeed and you're not going to feel that same contraction. You're going to be like, compassion, brother. Because you're what I could have become if I didn't start taking responsibility for my greed. I could have started a business because I want to make money and then made millions and then made billions and then start buying out land and property and owning all the corporations and enslaving the world and changing the laws. Like that could be me. You're just farther down the greed spectrum than I am. But who am I to judge? I'm still on the greed spectrum. It's like, it doesn't make any sense to judge you.
Dude, this is so profound.
When you see it that way, it's pretty easy,
It's
right?
so profound. Oh my God. One phrase I really like from A Course in Miracles is, God himself is incomplete without me. And somebody might hear that and be like, what?
Blasphemy.
God? Yeah. God is total. It's omnipresent. It's everything. And you're saying that God is incomplete without you, right? It's almost like it takes all of us. We make the one ship. We are the one ship.
I like that word, one ship.
Isn't that in the Course? Did I get that from the Course?
It's not.
I didn't?
No.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They say sonship.
Sonship, yeah.
But I like one ship.
That's like a synonym for the sonship.
Yeah.
Because the sonship, it means everyone's included. We're all the son of God, the only begotten son of God. I like to look at it this way. Metaphysically speaking, right? God is omnipresent. God is omniscient, omnipotent. And so how else could an infinite being experience itself other than through infinite perspectives? It would have to be, right? There's no way an infinite being could truly know itself from one perspective. So it takes up infinite perspectives all through the universe.
I was going to say, not just here, by the way.
Yeah, definitely not just
things we are not even close to aware of.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. But all those perspectives are going back to the one being. And so in that sense, God looks upon every person as if they're the only creation God ever made. Because God's not bound in time and separateness and duality. God doesn't compare God's creations to one another. God doesn't spread its love out equally. It gives like an equal fraction of its love to all beings. No. It gives all of its love to every being. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because God is one and cannot be divided. So because God can't be divided, God would be incomplete without you, because in you is the fullness of God. In you is the totality of God, looking through this perspective called Aaron or Frank. And so when I tune into that love of God for me, you can start to feel that sonship, as the Course calls it, where you're like, I am an extension of my Father. I'm an extension of my source. Just like my dream is an extension of me at night. It's part of me. It's one with me. And so the analogy I use is the ray of light coming from the sun. When Jesus said, I and my Father are one, he was speaking as a ray of light might speak, saying, I and the sun are one. Right? So there's a shared being there, but nobody at the same time would say that the sun is a ray of light. So the ray of light is the sun, but the sun is not a ray of light.
Whoa, wait, say that again.
So that's why Jesus said, but my Father is greater than I. Because the expression, Aaron, is one ray of light coming from the sun. And so it is one with the sun. It is an emanation of the sun. So I can say, I and the sun are one. And that's true. But yet it's also true to say, but the sun is greater than I. My Father is greater than I. Meaning what I really am is way beyond this physical expression you're seeing. But nevertheless, this expression is God. So it's the two things can be true. And I think that's what Christianity misses in Jesus's message, is that they're too dualistic in their view of God. They don't understand oneness, and like they contradict themselves constantly, right? They'll say, my God is omnipotent. Okay, well, that means there's no opposite to omnipotence. There's one power in the universe. So there's no devil that fights against God, or that God fights against. So your devil theology is gone. My God is omnipresent. Great, so is mine. There's no opposite to omnipresence. So everything is God. There's only God. There's only one being in existence. And doesn't the Old Testament say that? Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. That's what Moses said to the Israelites. The book of Isaiah, I am the Lord your God. Beside me, there is none else. It's just like the Upanishads or something. But they don't take that to its obvious logical conclusion, which means you're God, I'm God, everything's God, because only God exists. They hear it from a separation perspective of, I'm a separate person who lives and exists apart from God, and I'm claiming to be God. Well, yeah, from that position, that's not true, and that's blasphemy because it's not possible. But I'm not speaking from a person position. I'm not speaking as if I'm a separate entity claiming to make the universe go around. I'm saying the universe is in me, and I am in the universe, therefore I and God are one. It's a oneness statement, which is, of course, what Jesus was making. And so the ray of light sun analogy is what really clicked for me in terms of like the Christ consciousness. You're not saying this person is exclusively God. Nobody can say that. You're saying this person is God because every ray of light is the sun.
Do you think that he was using that terminology, kind of like you said with the Course, it's meeting you where you're at now? You know what I'm saying? So it's just, okay, how can these people understand it? Because you have to think, they're not where we are right now. Yeah, people don't remember 2,000 years ago, somebody would like cut off your arm because you stole a grape. Like It was not the world we are in now. So do you think that they were just like meeting people where they're at, where they're like, okay, how can they understand this? Father, son, like that's an analogy everybody understands.
Well, I think Jesus was very limited in his options for language because he was in this first century Jewish world that had a very monolithic view of God, a separation view of God. God's up there, somewhere up there, looking down on us. And if we want to make that angry God happy, we got to sacrifice our goats and give all these prayers and alms to God so he'll forgive us. Deep separation consciousness, right? So how is Jesus, who I believe came from the Essene order, a Jewish mystical lineage of the Kabbalah and stuff, who believed in oneness, taught oneness, but they stayed very far away from like modern day Jews because the modern day Jews hated them, thought they were heretical. There was no crossover in their beliefs. So the Essenes hid in the mountains of the Qumran caves and all of that. That's where all the historical relics of the Essenes have been found, is like deep away from Jerusalem in the desert caves and stuff. Is where they had to hide out because they would have been killed as heretics. I think Jesus came from the Essenes, from that lineage. One piece of historical evidence that would lend itself to that theory is that in the New Testament, they call Jesus the Nazarene. They call him Jesus the Nazarene. And the correct translation of that should be, from the Greek, should be the Nazarite. He was a Nazarite, but they called him the Nazarene.
Interesting.
Because he was from Nazareth. But there was a place in the, I hope I'm not misquoting this, I think it's the Qumran Valley. In the Qumran Valley where the Essenes were, there was, I think like 10 different major like towns. One was called Nazar, and it later got translated as Nazareth, the King James. But it was Nazar. So Jesus was a Nazar Essene. So they called him the Nazarene. And that was like a shortened way of saying like the Essene from Nazar. So he was an Essene and, praying on the mountain by himself, healing miracles, teaching oneness. That's all Essene stuff. That's all what the Essenes taught and believed, right? So he was like this Jewish mystic who came into the modern world of Judaism because he probably was moved with love to help these poor people who were being subjugated under the political class, the Pharisees, the Romans, paying taxes, paying penance to get into the temple, to have their sins forgiven, just like today, believing that the Pharisees were superior to them. These are the true religious leaders and we have to listen to what they say. And Jesus came along and was like, yo, these guys are the hypocrites that you shouldn't listen to. He pointed the finger at them and made some really powerful statements about them. One of them being, woe to you Pharisees, you are like unmarked graves. Men stand over you and are unaware. Like ultimate Jewish diss in that day. Because one of the Jewish laws in the Old Testament is to stand over a grave defiles you. So to be over a grave is defilement of self. And you have to go bathe 7 times to cleanse yourself. So Jesus is saying, you guys are like unmarked graves in that you're defiling everyone who comes near you and they're not even aware of it.
Wow.
That's how negative your energy is. So you're deceiving everybody. And so Jesus was trying to put his teachings in whatever language was available, which it was all dualistic. There was no non-duality language he could have chosen from, like there would have been in India or in Tibet. So he had to say things like the Father, but he was drawing these parallels in ways that I think they would understand. God is our Father, and I and my Father are one. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. These were his ways of describing his oneness experience of God. I think even referring to himself as the Son of God, or the only begotten Son, was his awareness that God has one creation. And all beings are that one creation. The one single only begotten Son is the whole universe, but you have to realize who you are to know that. So he was just speaking from that state, the I am state, all the time. I am the way, I am the bread of life, I am the resurrection and the life, because that was his identity, the I am principle, which God introduced Moses to in the Old Testament. When Moses says, who are you? Who should I say sent me? God says, I am that I am. And I think Jesus entered the I am state through his spiritual practices as an Essene. And I think that was probably a practice that the Essenes used of harnessing the I am, knowing the I am of me is the I am of God. And that's the point of contact with me and the divine. God is the first person in the present tense, right? So God is never the second or third person, and God is never past or future. God is always first person, present tense, I am. And that's why God named itself I am to Moses. So if I am, I mean, and every one of us can say I am, I exist. That's my point of contact with my divinity. That's the eternal dimension that transcends the body, the person that I am, that is forever. And if I get to know that as myself, you could call it your being. In that dimension of self, there's just eternal stillness and peace, perfection, equanimity. It's just pure being. There's no problems there. And from that place, you can learn to access that place in you and live from that place and witness the world from that place where you're, as Jesus said, in the world, but you're not of the world. You're not of the thought system of the world any longer. You're very much in the world to be help and a healing and of service to anyone who needs it. Jesus was certainly in the world, right? He's traveling everywhere all the time, doing miracles, healing people, but he was not of the world. He had a totally different level of consciousness that he brought to the world, which is why we're still talking about him today. So to me, like, you can't be in the world but not of the world unless you get to know yourself as the I am presence in you, the sense we all have that I exist, I am, I'm the subject always. I always know myself as the subject of my experience. I'm never the third person of my experience. I can't get away from the I, the amness, and there's something inherently, although very simple about that, and it's very subtle. It's easy for the ego to overlook and go, yeah, I know I exist. What big deal is that? Whatever. I want to go get something.
Yeah.
But the more you sit with that simple, quiet recognition, I am, you find more and more, you don't have any problems there. You don't need anything there. There's nothing to attach to, and there's nothing to be afraid of. It's perfect. It feels very intimate. It's like, you may call yourself Frank, right? But you really call yourself I, if you're being honest. You know yourself as I. If someone's like, hey, who's wearing that nice cologne? You're like, oh, I am. You don't say Frank is.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's more intimate than our name is. And something about meditating on that part of you, which I believe Jesus did, transforms you into that state over time. And then you can speak from that state very naturally. And when I see Jesus teaching in these ways, all the I am statements, it's like, clearly this dude was in that state.
Wow.
Why else would you talk like this? Yeah. But I think he was so deeply in that state that it was just kind of confusing and bewildering for his disciples. Like, this guy's frequency is on another level, but I don't understand what he's talking about.
Man, which is probably why, like when you said that I am of the world, in the world, but not of the world, probably why I always thought he would then, he did the miracles, traveled and everything, but a lot of times it was like in the caves or, in the desert with his 12, he knew who his students were, who would know how to take the message further, what they would, his disciples that would really know how to take this message. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It says Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness to pray. And I think meditate, commune with God.
Is there anything you want to leave people with?
Oh man. I mean, I sure hope we've left them with something at this point.
Good answer.
Yeah. Well, let's see. So I'll leave off with this. We've been talking a lot about heart consciousness, accessing the fourth chakra, opening the fourth chakra. This is what I teach about in all my YouTube videos and my 40 University. And so I'll give people like the simplest way to understand how to do this, the simplest like practice or framework. Goes back to the concept of oneness. But oneness is a difficult concept for people to grasp because it's like, oh, you and me are one. But then you say, but you're over there and I'm over here and you look like this and I look like that. So what do you mean we're one? And so oneness doesn't mean like there's no uniqueness between us, or there's no differences in any way. Like, it doesn't mean that. Oneness means same being, shared being, same essence, but many different expressions of that essence. And so a better way, I think, to conceptualize oneness is through the understanding that all things exist in relationship. And I think relationship helps us understand oneness better, in that everything around us, as we look out this beautiful window that the audience can't see, everything is in relationship to everything around it. You know, even a tree is in relationship to the atmosphere that it breathes, and it puts out, you know, oxygen back into the atmosphere. That's a relationship. You and I breathe that oxygen. That's a relationship. The water reflects the sky, the blue color of the sky. That's a relationship. You can go down to the most fundamental level of creation, and you'll just see relationship everywhere, because everything's interdependent on everything else. And nobody would argue with that. Science would say, yep, absolutely, organism, environment are one, it's all connected. Relationship to you, I'm in relationship to the camera.
And the space between us.
Yeah.
And like everything.
This moment.
My eye contact with yours with the sun, and then like it's like, when you describe it that way, wow.
It's a dance, right?
Yeah.
Everything's dancing in cooperative relationship and harmony and cooperation. So like, if everything's relationship, everything's cooperation, then we should get really interested in what kind of relationship am I having with everything? Because you can have an unloving relationship with things. What you can't do is not have a relationship with things. You know, the second you even think to engage with something, you're already in a relationship.
So true.
Right? So relationship is the inescapable, invisible reality of our universe, right? So you might as well get used to the idea that you're in a relationship all the time. But what kind of relationship are you in is the focal point. And most of us have been in very unloving relationships with many, many things. With just our house. You know, I hate my house. I wish I had a better house. Like, something so simple all the way to something like, I hate my ex. You know, those are unloving relationships. And so forgiveness, the ACIM path, could also be described as gradually coming into a loving relationship with all that is, with everything you interact with. Make it a loving relationship. Because when you make it a loving relationship, you make it a holy relationship, as the Course says. You make it a sacred thing, in that you are no longer here to infringe on the free will of anyone or anything. You know, you're here to honor everybody and everything. That's what love does. Your love is unconditional, which means I don't care how you treat me. I'm going to treat you the same no matter what. And you could cuss at me right now, you could threaten me, and I'm going to have the same disposition towards you of, I forgive you, I love you, I have nothing against you, brother. And if you want me to leave, I'll leave, but like, I'm not going to judge you in any way. So if I practice that, keeping a loving relationship, at least on my end, every relationship will be loving. That's enlightenment, right? That's heart consciousness. The state, enlightenment is that state where you've made all relationships loving. And I think that's just probably the simplest framework we could give people.
Wow, so good. Thank you.